Many professors who are teaching online right now just really miss being in the room with their students. A lot of them find online instruction to be impersonal. They've learned that trying to replicate the in-person experience online doesn't really work, but they're still figuring out how to connect with their students in a new format. Some feel they've lost the most rewarding part of teaching and the part that they were the best at. Hi, I'm Becky Supiano, a senior writer with the Chronicle. Welcome to today's virtual event. I'm here with an expert panel to discuss how professors can center the human element in their online courses. We'll talk about the unique possibilities online learning can provide to build connection, how to teach inclusively online, and the particular challenges posed by teaching large courses in this format. We'll be taking your questions, and we're also eager to hear your ideas. Before we get started, we've got a few housekeeping notes for you. Please send us your questions or comments in the Q&A box, not chat, Q&A. For security reasons, we will be screening them before they go live, so give us a little bit of patience on that. I'll plan to get to your questions in the second half of today's panel. As a reminder, this panel's discussion is being recorded. We'll send an email with a link to the on-demand version in a few days. That email will also have some resources that the panelists are going to mention and that we'll share with some more information from today. If you have any technical issues, you can send an email to the address here, connect@chronicle.com, and someone on our staff will get back to you and help you with any issues you're having. We'd like to thank the underwriter of today's broadcast, TechSmith. We really appreciate their support in helping us have this conversation today. I'd also like to quickly introduce my colleague, Ian Wilhelm, who's an editor at the Chronicle. About halfway through the broadcast, we'll take a little break where Ian will conduct a short interview with Shane Levelet, Education Strategy Lead with TechSmith. Then we'll return back to the rest of our panel discussion and your questions. Now I would like to quickly introduce today's panelists. We're so glad they're here. We have Michelle Pacansky-Brock, who's a community college educator and the author of Best Practices for Teaching with Emerging Technologies. We have Viji Sathy, a teaching professor of psychology and neuroscience at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and Mike Trung, the executive director of the Office of Innovative Teaching and Technology at Azusa Pacific University. All right, hi everyone. Thanks again so much for being here.
Hey there. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Since March, I've heard so many professors describe teaching online as feeling detached and impersonal. Yet instructors who are passionate about teaching online say, in fact, it presents unique opportunities for building connection. Mike, I know you feel that way. Could you tell us a little bit about why?
Sure. Well, thank you, Becky, and nice to meet everybody. Part of why I'm passionate is that this idea of teaching remotely really opens up the classroom. You know, we've always talked about this idea of a classroom without borders before. You know, I think metaphorically, there were so many conferences I went to, and maybe a decade ago, where teaching without borders. Now we really have the situation that we do have a borderless classroom, and things that were not possible in terms of meeting with faculty outside the classroom now is happening. And so I think for all those reasons, I think this idea of borderless, what I call anytime, anywhere, any device, teaching and learning environment is now happening. I think that's where the possibilities are endless. And this is where I think why I'm excited about this conversation about how do we now creatively think about the human connection in a way that was not really possible because of those physical boundaries.
I can add on to that a little bit.
Yeah.
And I have to be very honest that maybe I'm an outlier because I started teaching online back in 2003. That's when I went into starting to teach online from teaching fully face-to-face. But I wasn't coming into it with this significant sense of loss and this emotional layer, in addition to all the trauma that we're experiencing with COVID and our racial pandemic. So it's not an apples to apples comparison, but I was really surprised to find that I developed more connections with more students when I started teaching online. And then the next phase of that was developing connections between students. But it started with me connecting with my learners And that was a real surprise to me. So I saw it as an opportunity to create a seat at the table for all students, but then also was very aware that there are barriers for certain students to take that seat. So maybe we can unpack that a little bit more, but that's where I'm coming into the conversation.
Yeah, and I'll add that I have been thinking about inclusive teaching, and before this emergency remote transition, thinking about the structures that we provide to our students to enable them to succeed in class and in our courses. And I feel that this is an opportunity because people are building structures in this online environment that I feel that they're going to find some success with and will want to continue even beyond this period when we are all online for some time. And that's the exciting part for me, is to see faculty really engaging with reaching all their learners in this way.
Thanks, everyone. I'm often struck by how much experimenting and tinkering and adjusting goes into teaching, even under normal circumstances. And I was wondering if you would each maybe take a minute and share an example quickly of something you tried to do to connect with students online that didn't work, and if you know why it didn't. Michelle, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So, and to clarify, my online teaching experience is all asynchronous. And I think the first thing that comes to my mind is early on, I started using VoiceThread, which is an asynchronous discussion or conversation tool that gives students an option to comment in voice, video, or text writing. So going back to the supporting, creating multiple pathways to support the different ways that students learn. And early on, I would give my students, everyone just choose how you want to comment. And what I started seeing was that it was the students, and again, and maybe I didn't say this, I teach at the community college level. So of course we accept everyone. So a huge range in terms of students' abilities, but also their confidence about their academic abilities. And so it was most common for us to have the students who are very articulate with their language take center stage and use the microphone. Not a whole lot of video, but use the microphone. Whereas students who did not speak English as a native language, students who were uncomfortable with their, just a perception that their abilities weren't as good as their peers, were more likely to write. But what I started to find over the years was when I started to reconceive of how I created that tool, it started to shift, or brought that tool in, it started to shift. So instead of using it as an assessment the first time, using it as a very low stake icebreaker, where you're inviting students in to share something about themselves with the class, and me playing a very, very active role in it. And for that icebreaker, challenging students for everyone to use voice or video. And what I found was after we did that, significantly more students were willing to speak. And I think that that's a really important part of students, to be able to see and hear each other, and for me to be able to hear and see my students, but not for every conversation. I use that intermittently, but that's something that didn't work well for me, but something that I was able to improve over time.
Thanks.
I'll say something here about teaching online. And so probably my first experience teaching online was probably back in the early 2010, 2011 era. And like Michelle, was mostly asynchronous. You sort of set up these shells and then things kind of just happen in there. And over the years, I've found that, that online asynchronous, similar kind of issues as what Michelle has mentioned about some students just, they were into it, and then others were just sort of minimum engagement. And over the years, what I've tried to do is actually bring in more synchronous pieces to those courses. And in fact, I think to this day, I think there are now, I'm feeling like it's more of a blended mix, because I think the asynchronous is very powerful in terms of giving students time to process, time to sort of respond at their own pace and things like that. But what it does lose, it's sort of that human contact, the element that we see here, and we can see each other, hear each other, that human touch that is just so vital to the learning experience. And I think in recent years, I've sort of been more about how do we create these kind of synchronous moments in our classrooms? How do we find time to connect with one another? And the ability to be able to see and hear each other is, I know there are issues with that as well. I don't want to dismiss that, but I think the value of that human, at least the high touch, the best that we can do in a remote setting is that it gives everybody at least a sense of belonging. Virtually we're kind of part of the session, and so the ability to see and hear each other makes a difference. And also, I think one other thing is that this idea of a sense of belonging is so critical to the sort of the culture of the class, if you will, that students who don't feel connected in whatever way, I mean, asynchronous online courses do have that liability, if you will, of how students may just, they do the minimum work, they're not really connecting with students, or they're just doing the minimal of the discussion. And then being able to have this kind of synchronous environment, I think really helps them to kind of feel more sense of belonging and so on.
Yeah, I mean, both of those things definitely resonate. I think I'm the newbie in the group in terms of having online teaching experience. I haven't been doing it very long. And for me, I think the issue was thinking about, and as I do with inclusive teaching, the idea of what is optional and what is required. And I am a big proponent that important features should be required so that all students know to take advantage of that. And it became a very difficult dialogue with myself and with colleagues about what do we require in this element of the transition of online teaching? What parts are really important? How do I make that decision about, is this important? Should I let this one become optional? So those are some of the things I struggled with early on. And still struggle with, thinking about things that I took for granted being really easy, like group work and the ability for students to just hang out in class and wrap up any task that they might have, now takes a lot more facilitation and structure online. And so those are things that I have to think about, either building space for or letting some of it go and deciding what is important. We do synchronously, for example. So those are the kinds of things I'm thinking about.
Yeah, if I could just add one thing about synchronicity. In terms of, I just trying to get everybody to keep in mind, I think that we serve different student populations, and for synchronous instruction in community colleges, it's a real barrier, because we have students who don't have the privilege of knowing what their schedule is even going to be like week to week. Nearly all of them are working, and a survey from the Hope Center last year revealed that 50% of them were either housing insecure and 50% of them were food insecure in the past year. So saying, let's meet online at this time on this day is something that can really be a barrier and actually exacerbate that kind of belonging issue. I know, we all know from experience when someone has said, hey, let's be here this time in this place, and you have a legitimate reason why you can't be there, and the session gets archived for you, great, but it doesn't make you feel like you belong, does it? And so that's something that I think is really important to keep in mind when considering the students that you serve.
Thanks, everyone. Okay, so here's the big question. What really does work online? How can professors build the kind of classroom community that fosters learning and collaboration and makes this all feel human again? Viji, we'll start with you, since you said you're the newest to this. I'll put you on the spot.
Sure. I'll say that this is a challenge, I think. I mean, every faculty member I talk to, every colleague, every friend who teaches, this is what comes to mind. It's like this idea that the connection is lost, or it's somehow damaged as a result of what we're doing right now. And I see, and I guess this is my glass half full lenses that I always wear. I always see opportunities. Like you'll see in my name here, I've included a name pronunciation guide and a pronoun for myself. So this is one simple way I can model for people how to say my name, what pronouns I use. So I see a lot of tools in this environment that I don't readily have available to me in an in-person environment. So I like to use those as much as possible. But the connection piece is one that I struggled with initially because I love fostering community in my classroom and thinking about doing it, especially in a large class. I usually teach about 200 students. And so in a large class is really important. I remember when we made the transition in the spring, one thing I had been putting off learning how to do, but learned eventually how to do, was a mail merge. And so I have a survey that I ask my students to do before the semester starts. And in it, I ask for their preferred names, like how they like for me to call them. And so I did a mail merge with that name, sending a note just saying I was thinking about them and that we would be fine with the transition. I would make adjustments. And I sent out this note. And within a matter of, I don't know, like 30 minutes, almost half the class wrote me back, thanking me for the note. And of course, it's a simple mail merge, but for some students reading quickly, they see a note, dear such and such, and it's one of those small things you can do that really conveys that, like, I really care about you as a person. Clearly, I didn't copy and paste 200 emails, but I took the time to learn how to do this so that it felt like a personalized message and it felt like I was connecting with them on an individual basis. So I think my main thing is thinking about how do I harness technology to allow me to have that kind of one-on-one kind of conversation I might have with a student as much as possible.
Can I add to that? Yeah, I think that's a great strategy and something that we, in the system where I work now in California, we are also really focusing on humanizing online learning. It's an effort that we've had underway for many years, and we have a whole professional development course on humanizing online learning in an asynchronous environment, because we learned long ago that, just like Viji said, that is a barrier. That's a real, and it's always been a barrier for faculty to want to teach online. So by really emphasizing how to do it, it's been really helpful for faculty. I also find, like, when you are writing individually to a student, to put their first name in the subject line with a comma after it. So say, Carlos, just checking in with you, instead of missing assignment or something like that. It's received differently. And that really goes back to this idea of cues. Like, what are the cues that your students experience when they log into your course, when they join Zoom? And our students who are pushing back, who have distrust when they come into our learning environments, and these are our students who have been minoritized through their educational experiences before college, primarily, or they've been shut down in some way. And so trying to build trust, relational trust with your students before you start thinking about discussions. I mean, the first step is trust. And something that we are using is, the concept is a liquid syllabus, and it's taking your syllabus, turning it into a public web page with a quick, brief, very friendly video of you at the top. You send that link to your students before the class starts, so they have an opportunity, their first opportunity to connect. The first cue they get is, first of all, something that'll open on a phone instead of having to figure out how to log into a learning management system, but they're actually being greeted by your warm, friendly face. And there's other components of that we recommend as well, but that's one strategy.
I'd love to add to that in terms of the idea of radical compassion and radical self-care, especially during this time, because so I teach at a private university, and we are definitely have a different student population than the community colleges and other places, but I think over 50% of our students are of color, and also probably a third of them are first generation, and so there's we have similar population in some ways from sort of the public school, but at the same time we have different student population. But I think regardless of sort of the population that we have, I think we're always thinking about, like, student thriving, which is a big terminology we use on campus. Now, what does it mean to have students thriving, faculty thriving, the campus as a whole thriving? And what I alluded to earlier about a radical compassion and radical self-care, it's the idea of being sensitive to the current reality, that everybody is in, wherever students may be, what Michelle was referring to about some students are not able to connect synchronously. And last couple of weeks, I've been dealing with helping faculty to address situations where the students have like a Chromebook, for example, and that's just a simple example where they can't take some of the proctored exam tests because the lockdown browser doesn't work and the Chromebook's functionality is just not there. And how do they participate in a basic thing like taking a quiz and in a way that sort of ensures some integrity and so on. And so those kinds of challenges are realities for us as well. And I think what I've tried to kind of reinforce when I meet with the faculty, and my role is really about supporting the faculty and making sure that they are equipped to support their students. And so helping them to show compassion for them as faculty in that situation, in the situation that they're also struggling themselves. A lot of the faculty are, they're very, very, uncomfortable and not confident about the reality that they're in. And at the same time, they're helping students in this, similar situation. And so that the idea of showing compassion, extending it to them, hopefully then they will extend to their students. And then the other concept of self-care, how are we thinking about not just the students' academic development? I think that's very important, and that's what education is about. But what about their other aspects of them? Like sort of Michelle talked about the food insecurity, the body, their housing insecurity, and just their emotional state. How are they dealing with all the things that's happening, not just with school, but with their families, with their, maybe they've lost income because they don't have a campus job anymore. So the sort of the whole person, how are we caring for the whole person, and being able to kind of begin to address those things are part of what we're doing, I think, in terms of helping students thrive.
Thank you. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, Mike, one of the things that I love about what you and Michelle have brought up was this idea of the whole person and really thinking about this human experience we're all engaged in. And the thing is, we were all whole people, and we were in a human experience before all of this. But it's brought it to the fore in a way that we can't deny it, and we have to handle it head on. And that's where I think this is where things will change, because when those students, like in my case, we have students that are, when we're on campus, when we're on campus, it's easy to make all of those disparities almost disappear because everybody's on a really good Wi-Fi on our campus, right? So it's not as clear what those differences are, and you can almost just almost avoid the fact that there are differences. But now we're really seeing it play out very strongly, and I think we're addressing it. I hope we're addressing it in ways that we can carry forward with us. But it is this notion that we're really, I think, facing facts about who our students are and what they need as a whole person.
Okay, thanks. In just a minute here, I'm going to turn things over briefly to Ian, but let's just go around really quickly first and give just one tip of something you do that helps build rapport with your students. Oh, and I should say who's going to start with this first. Let's start with Michelle.
I use this as much as I can. And when I say this, I'm talking about phones, but I record videos all the time on my phone, like a 30-second video, a 1 minute, a 2-minute video. I started doing videos about learning. I have one video where I'm next to a big watermelon and I say, our learning modules are like watermelons. If you think about trying to complete this or eat this whole watermelon right now, it's overwhelming. But if you cut it up into chunks and eat a little bit every day, you'll be done in a week. So trying to think about ways to use your phone to really kind of bring your human presence in, weave it in throughout an asynchronous environment, and avoid the really, really long videos.
Thanks. Mike, you want to go next? Or
sure. I guess my keyword is daily habit. It's so hard to keep a routine, I think, especially at the home environment, especially even for me. I have kids coming in and out, and sometimes it's like, how do I keep up with my regular routine? And I think that's been sort of my go-to, is helping students and ensuring that you stick to a routine that works for them. Because I think the routine builds habit, and habit hopefully leads to kind of successes, and over time that will lead to sort of overall thriving.
Yeah, and to add to that, I do have sessions that are synchronous that a lot of students attend, and I will do check-ins with students. So we might have a poll question as they're entering in the room. There's a poll question up asking them, what are they grateful for today? What's something that what's the last meal they really enjoyed? And this gives students a chance to sort of meet their peers in this kind of casual way. And this doesn't have to be an awkward entrance into a synchronous session. We can just simulate some of that chatter that might occur in a space when we're in together, but to get to know each other in this way.
Thanks. Okay, so in just a second, we're going to turn things over to Ian. And during that time, the panelists will go on mute and we'll turn off our cameras. But when we come back, I'll let you guys know the question I'm going to ask you next, so you have some time to think about this one. A source recently commented to me that with so much of the typical college experience unavailable to students because they're not on campus or because of social distancing, classes really are college to students much more than would normally be true. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on what opportunities and challenges that poses for instructors. Thanks. See you in a little bit.
Hey, thanks, Becky. And thanks for the good discussion so far, all the panelists. And I do want to welcome Shane Lavalette from TechSmith. Shane, thanks for being here today.
Thanks, Ian. I'm really excited to be a part of it. And so far, I love what we've been hearing from the panelists. It's been a great virtual forum.
Yeah, we've also been getting a lot of questions in the Q&A, and Becky's going to try and get as many of those as possible in the second half of this conversation. Shane, I was hearing the panelists talk about some of the things that you and I had talked about just the other day in terms of, well, what we've learned from the spring and obviously what we're learning from the fall in some ways, but this idea of like that, it's a mix of synchronous and asynchronous. It's not one or the other, obviously. It's not obviously replicating your lecture course to be online, so it's just videoing yourself. It's got to be thought of differently. And I think that same thing you were sort of saying to me, that sort of this blended model as best we can get to, that's where we need to be heading.
Yeah, absolutely. I think obviously it does matter, as it was brought up and talked about, thinking about your student population and their needs and differences and uniqueness that they have, so you can meet them best, how they can consume and interact with that content and the learning. But I think it's also really important to keep in mind the different, elements available to you and interspersing those as best you can, because the blended model, all synchronous or all asynchronous may work for some, but typically it's some kind of a paradigm in between, right? Some amount of each that gives you the ability to have some of that personalized one-on-one human interaction with your students, and balancing that with the flexibility you get from having the asynchronous content available so they can consume that and interact with that on their own time and schedules when it makes sense for them.
And yeah, you'd also mentioned something, I think it came up within the panelists as well. Obviously, we're talking about having a human element within your teaching online or in different versions. This idea of sort of, hey, put your face out there in different, and when you can, we're not talking just in the format we're talking about here, but in other places where you might not normally have it, to make that connection, put your name, your face, but also what you basically said was, I thought, great, like make sure you as an instructor are extending your passion to your students as best you can, expressing that passion for the subject matter. And I just wonder if there's sort of ways people can do that, they can sort of take out of this session today.
Sure, absolutely. I think there's a lot of ways you can think about bringing in video, and so that you're recording yourself and having the opportunity to share your face and your passion. Students really want to hear from the faculty member that they're actually taking the course from. It's really important. Obviously, they can get, you can go on YouTube today and search and find all kinds of different kinds of content, but faculty are the ones that are really the guide in helping the students learn the content, understanding the why behind that. And so even that, as Viji mentioned with the email note, just an encouragement, some of our customers are doing that with just recorded video of themselves, just as encouragement to say, hey, we're halfway through the semester, you guys are doing great. We've got some things to look forward to. Just simple messages like that and video, and them seeing your smiling face and hearing your voice really can have a huge impact on helping students feel connected with you, as well as being, feeling like they're getting a specific and unique experience in that course that they can't get elsewhere. And I also think you can do that in a lot of ways with, introducing content. If you've got a lot of PowerPoint type content you need to record, but introducing your face in terms of the introduction or as part of it throughout, or even as, picture in picture within that content. So they are continuously seeing you, and hearing it from your voice and your perspective can be very powerful for students.
Yeah, like you said, adding to some material that's already sort of pre-baked, if you will, already ready to go, but you can still add a little bit of yourself into them to add to it. And so it kind of personalizes it a little bit. Seems like a smart approach potentially.
Absolutely. And again, that's like modeling that behavior. That gives you the opportunity to start introducing and asking students to participate in that way as well. You know, we have a lot of customers that will do that sort of class introduction, course introduction video, and especially in an online course, you can uh, do that in an asynchronous way. So you're going over the syllabus, but also introducing yourself and why you care about teaching the course and why the students, you know, try and get them excited about the content they're going to learn. All of those really help, I think, students become engaged and kick the semester off or the course off on the right foot.
Right. I think the other thing you mentioned to me in terms of some of the things you may be sharing with your students, though, is also thinking about the length of any video, any lecture, anything that you're sharing in that format, to be careful about sharing too much of it, or just be careful. The length of it is important. So I wondered what you're thinking now. What's a good recommendation for a rough time frame for how long should a video be, so people are not expecting students to sit in front of the screen for a full video necessarily?
Sure. And we got to take this with a grain of salt to some degree, right? There's always content, depends on the content a little bit and how complex and the subject matter is for sure. So you want to consider that. But in a lot of the research out there, anything from, you know, like 6 to 9 minute framework or duration time is about the max where you don't start to see significant drop off. It does depend a little bit on the type of content. So I know that there was some research done with MOOCs, for example, the massive open online courses, and looking at different types of production that they did with the faculty member being just more casual at their desk, recording themselves and switching between them being on camera and the content on the screen. That was more engaging for students, and that tended to last, the engagement levels lasted longer through that time frame, even into beyond 12 minutes. But the ones that were more, you know, at a podium, like in a classroom sort of approach, the engagement just typically dropped off after that 6 minute mark. So those are other things you want to think about as you're creating content, is that casual nature and that human nature as well. You don't have to be super high production value with these. It's even better, you know, students will connect better and feel more human connection if you're, you know, sitting at your desk. And if you make a mistake in your audio as you're talking, you just, you know, let the students know, laugh it off, make it a joke, whatever. But those little things are what makes it more human than, you know, a highly polished production value type video.
Right. Sometimes the dog's going to bark in your video, and that's fine.
Sure, absolutely, absolutely.
So
but there's other things too you can do, you know, to enhance the engagement as well then, because that does take a different approach than, you know, being able to see your students in the classroom and be able to tell if they're engaged or not to some degree. So things like adding some quizzing questions and things like that into the video. Harvard did some research around that and looked at and found in that study that having those quiz questions as part of the lecture content reduced students' mind wandering when they're watching the videos. It increased their note taking while they're watching the videos, and then they did better on their final exam after having consumed those videos versus the group that didn't get the quiz questions integrated right into the content. So there's things like that you can do that really help, you know, turn that passive experience of watching a video into a more active one for students. And I think then you can also experiment with your discussion and conversations that you try and drive around the content as well, because you can have those that's easy in the classroom, right? To be talking or sharing some piece of content and then drive that conversation around that, right? And online, that's turned into the old discussion board sort of approach, which is sort of, there's a lot of love-hate relationship out there around the traditional discussion boards, but ways you can enhance that to drive that interactivity and discussion that happens right inside the content can really create more meaningful connections for both faculty and students, but also that student-to-student interaction as they're able to talk to each other and converse and help each other answer questions, even if they're stumped on something.
Yeah, we've heard some comments about discussion boards, as you mentioned, but also I think your point about helping to facilitate and reduce that amount of mind wandering that might happen sometimes makes a lot of sense to me. Well, Shane, I really appreciate your time today. And I should say also thanks to TechSmith for being the sponsor for today's conversation. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. We're excited to be a part of this and look forward to the rest of the forum.
Great. Thanks, Shane. And I'll kick it back over to Becky to pick up the conversation with our panelists, and just to remind our panelists to come back online. And Becky, I'll let you have it. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Ian. Welcome back, everyone. As promised, I want to hear your thoughts on just this bigger piece of context that courses are a much larger portion of the student experience than they normally would be right now. Let's have Mike start with this one, if you would.
Yeah, thanks, Becky. And this is where I'm super excited, because of all things in the world that would advocate for instructional design or course design, a pandemic is one that has been the biggest advocate. I recently in an article that Becky wrote, I talked about this idea that no time is more important than now to really have that instructional design mindset for faculty. And that comes with thinking through that whole, like, how does a learning outcome inform the activities, the assignments, the assessments, the through line that we always talk about in teaching and learning circles about how you shouldn't be doing things that doesn't connect back to the learning outcomes. And I think right now in this environment, faculty are forced in some ways to think more about their courses, forced to think more about their activities and their assessments and their assignments in a way that maybe they weren't pushed as much before. And so, so the whole instructional design mindset is becoming, I think, a requirement for all faculty, and that's part of, if you think about this. How all these other college events and activities are fading into the background, and all the socializing and all I mean, those are all critical and important part of the experience. But now, because the course itself is front and center, faculty really need to start thinking through, their learning outcomes, their assignments, their assessment, and their activities in a way that hopefully makes them better faculty to begin with. But then more than that, it improves and makes the learning experience more enriching and fulfilling for their students.
Thanks. Viji, you want to hop in next?
Sure. Thank you for giving us a little time to think about it. It's a hard question. I think about my college experience, and oftentimes the memories I have are not necessarily of sitting in a classroom listening to an instructor. My fondest memories are interactions with my peers and activities that I participated in or helped plan. And so I feel that loss with my students about not having that kind of outlet, at least not in the traditional sense. But I want to try to create a space like that in my course. I want to try to build assignments that allow them to, for example, have experience with research. We know that that's something that might be challenging for students right now. And I teach a statistics course, so I can give them some research experience skills in the course. And so thinking about ways in which I can do some shoring up in my class to give them the kinds of sort of out of class experiences that they were looking forward to, the chances to get to know each other. I heard this great suggestion about why not just leave the room open a little longer at the end of a session, and anybody who wants to just hang out and chat can, right? And it's just a simple thing like that, but it allows people to have a chance to get together in this way. So I think these are the kinds of things that I'm really thinking about more and more, about those extracurriculars. Maybe they don't have to be extra. They can be part of just what you do as your course.
Thanks.
I totally agree, by the way, Viji. That's a great answer. When you asked that question, I started thinking about student support services. And when we dig a little bit deeper into that notion of supporting the whole student, it's important that instructional faculty remember that we are not trained in the area of mental health, right? And so a lot of the times you may find students who you need to refer, who you need to encourage to reach out to a counselor, a mental health counselor. And so thinking about ensuring that our students have access to student support services online, I think that's so very important. And also for us to keep in mind that our own well-being is really tied, going back to the idea of just self-care. We have to take care of ourselves first as faculty before we can be there for our students. And it's sensitive. But the more we engage with our students, there's a tax to that. It gets hard. It's a heavy blanket to carry around. And I'm not saying that it's not important that we go there. I'm saying that we have to stay aware of ourselves and when we also need to get support for our own well-being. And hopefully our institutions are supporting that online too.
Thanks. We've been getting a lot of great questions from participants today, and I'd like to start tackling some of those. Unfortunately, we won't be able to get to all of them, but we'll get to as many as we can here. I guess to be fair to everyone in whatever situation, I'll start with one that's specifically about synchronous courses and one specifically about asynchronous, so we can cover all of our bases. I guess I should have a hybrid question too, but no one has asked one that kind of fits there. So this question's from Cheryl Huff, who wants to know the panelists' thoughts on requiring cameras to be on during a synchronous session. She writes that she's heard of instructors who are requiring this, but she's also heard from experts in trauma-informed teaching that there are issues with raising student anxiety and their privacy concerns. Could you all share some thoughts on this? Let's start with Michelle.
Yeah, I'm not a supporter of that idea. I think it should be, I think if you're thinking about building community, again, it goes back to the idea of trust and treating your students with dignity and inviting them, creating an environment where you acknowledge, like, it would be great if you have the opportunity to turn on your webcam. I would appreciate being able to see you. If you don't, that is your prerogative. And really instilling that trust in students. Just because you see a person doesn't mean you're building community. You could be doing a lot more harm than what you're intending, the good that you're intending to bring to a learning environment. So that's my thought.
Does anyone want to add to that at all?
I'll just add that to ask yourself why you want those cameras on, and really just think about, is it for you or is it for something else? And if it's for you, then maybe there's another workaround. Maybe it's just that they post a picture up of themselves, and so you see them, you see their face and their name, but you don't necessarily need to have the camera on.
I'll be more middle of the road. I'd say it depends. Oftentimes, sorry. Now, for everything that Michelle and Viji mentioned, I mean, I think, yes, we need to be sensitive to those situations of students, and we need to be aware of sort of the issues involved with, being on camera and so on. At the same time, last a couple of weeks, our campus have been dealing with this whole idea of, camera on or off, and more than that, we've been dealing with, do we record these sessions, class sessions? That's been a big topic on campus. And where we kind of landed is, I think we sort of legal spoken and said, with consent and with agreement as a whole. And I think this is where each faculty really has his or her prerogative in how they want to determine their classroom. Because at least at AP, our classes are relatively small in size, so that I think that's important. Like when you're talking about 5, 6, maybe 8 students in a senior seminar kind of classroom, I think it's important for our honors classes. They want to see each other. They want to be able to have that kind of sort of Socratic conversations with each other, and to be able to see, okay, who's leaving, who's ending the conversation, who's picking up, and you can't do that without a camera on. And I think that's just one example, but obviously in bigger classes, it's harder to do, and it's not as helpful having the camera.
Okay, thanks. And as promised, a question about asynchronous classes. This one's from Nancy Luong, who wants to know if we could have some more examples of building in these sort of smaller synchronous elements in an asynchronous course, and how to do that to foster that sense of belonging. Mike, could you start us with that one? Yeah,
so I think the synchronous has to be thought through. And Viji said this earlier about what's the purpose of why you want that synchronous and the camera, and as long as there's a purpose and there's a goal in mind, and it could be as simple as just having, if you record your lectures and put that asynchronously available for students, having maybe a 30-minute session where you're available to answer questions about the video that you recorded. That's a very valuable time, I think, for students. Same thing with office hours or whatever discussion opportunities you want to provide your class. Those are, I think, as long as it's thought through and there's a purpose and a goal, then I think it's worth doing that synchronous time together.
So I have one idea for the beginning of a course for using synchronous, again, in a primarily asynchronous environment. Creating different slots that students could sign up for like a 10 to 15 minute synchronous session where it's really just a touch point, having them see you live, interact with you live, and in that small group setting. So assuming that, you know, you've got small groups of students, actually pairing students up into buddies in that session, so that by the end of the session, they've made a connection with you, their instructor, but they also have some kind of connection with another person in the course in case there's, you know, questions. They may be more comfortable reaching out to a student than their instructor for some questions.
And I'm a big fan of the breakout rooms. I think that's a really great way to build community, and especially a big class, to give them a really structured prompt to work on, send them to the breakout room. And then I love to have tools like polling or a Google Doc where I can sort of keep track of responses as they're coming in and seeing where people might be getting stuck and popping into rooms that might need my guidance. So it's trying to simulate some of that small group work that we would do in a classroom space, doing that online.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. Oh, sorry. I'm just going to jump in there and say, could we spend a little more time talking about really large classes? Because so many of the, you know, things we write and the conversations I hear with faculty, one of like the 3 things I can guarantee someone's going to say is like, but okay, I'm teaching hundreds of students. How can I possibly make this work in that situation? And Viji, I know you're in a course environment like that. Can we just spend a little more time talking about how to really do this when you have large numbers of students?
Yeah, I mean, it's a challenge. It's always a challenge, no matter what classroom you have, no matter what size, thinking through the purpose, working backwards from your goals. I mean, those are always a challenge, but I think there's sort of an administrative hurdle sometimes with the bigger courses, because I'll give this really common example. If you screw up a deadline, let's say you post something on your syllabus and then your learning management system has a different date. The minute you do that, you don't have just 1 or 2 students contacting you. You've got about 30 or 40 students contacting you, right? So there's always just a little bit more in terms of the amount of effort to streamline things. And I've gotten pretty good at sort of having checks and balances and telling my students, I'm going to mess up. That's just a given. So you can call it out, and here's the different ways in which you can call it out for me. So giving them some avenues for that. But I think the biggest challenge, I think, for big classrooms is sort of the flexibility that's needed at this time. I think there are a lot of great tools for sort of pushing materials out in a uniform way, but not always collecting materials back in a not uniform way. And by that, I mean, if I give an extension to an individual student or think about flexibility for assessments, there's not always the best sort of systems around that, but we're getting better at it. So those are the kinds of things that I am trying to think through, not just the tech side of things, but the sort of instructor side of things, about how do you build sort of a robust platform that allows you to have that structure and flexibility in a big classroom, because you're going to need and want to push in a lot of different directions once you get going.
Thanks. Does anyone want to add to that? Okay, I'll move on to another good question we've gotten. This one is from a self-identified new community college professor who's asking about the technical issues that her students are facing. And this is put nicely: how can I design my course to avoid assessing technology and truly assess learning instead? Michelle, I'll have you start with that one.
Yeah, well, I think for me, to a certain degree, there is an expectation, you know, on faculty, depending on the tools that you are using in your course, right? So take a step back and ask yourselves, like, technology is a really big word. So, right, if you're talking about your learning management system that's provided by your institution to all students, well, that is something that your institution should be prepared to support students with, right? But if you're bringing in an external tool that's specific to your course, then there is more of a need for you as the faculty member to not only understand how to use that tool, but also to be aware of what some of the problems can be. Like, does it run on every browser? Does it work on tablets? Does it work on phones? Does it, you know, what are some of those issues that you have to think through, and providing some of the how-to for students. So I do think that that is part of it. And those are choices that I think individual faculty members really need to make based upon your bandwidth, you know, what you can take on, and your comfort level with trying new tools. But like Viji said, I start with a pact for my class, which is a list of what students can expect from me and what I will expect from them. So, you know, I make it clear I do my very best. I will make mistakes, and they're going to make mistakes too. And so I think that's part of it with using new tools, is trying to give students the opportunity to have grace for themselves and expect to kind of fumble a little bit, and know that they can come to you for that support when they need it.
Yeah, and I think it's important too to think about the tools that you introduce and what the sort of hidden curriculum behind those tools are. You know, I've used classroom response systems for a while, so thinking about making sure students know how to go back and access their responses to a previous poll question, right? So that's something that all students need to be able to know how to do, not just because they've had another course that taught them that, but because I told them this is a useful feature and you should look at it, and here I'm going to model it for you in class, or here's how you start or end a conversation in Zoom in my course, right? So thinking about ways in which you can really provide structure around the tools that you're providing so that students understand how you expect them to interact with those tools. And then it doesn't have to always fall on you to understand every platform, everything. Like maybe that's a discussion board topic, right? So I have a whole section that's a tech section on our discussion board that is, if you're running into a problem, it's not just me. There are 200 other people in this course who might be able to help you with that problem. So let's see if we can just put our heads together and solve it together. So it's really starting to build again that community of learners, that this is a group of us that are all taking on something, and we might have some insights we can offer each other.
I just wanted to add this idea that, you know, keeping it simple is important. And especially for faculty who are not used to dealing with technology in an online environment, this is so overwhelming. I mean, I recently, I think, I forget where I read it, where the idea of doing online this remote teaching is like asking the faculty to be octopuses. You know, they're like doing 5 things at the same time while they're monitoring chat, and they're looking at their presentation, they're presenting, and it's overwhelming for any average faculty, and especially for faculty who are new to this remote online kind of environment. My big encouragement to them and recommendation is this: no more than 2, maybe 3 total tool technologies that you use. Now, like you have your PowerPoint, and maybe that you don't count that as one, but if you're presenting, and you might want to just use one other thing when you're doing synchronously, and in your course, the asynchronous part where you use your LMS, and maybe you want to tackle one other tool. But if you just do too many, it just gets overwhelming, not only for the faculty, but also for the students. And then there's so many potential technical problems and glitches that if you're not, as a faculty, prepared to address and support, then that's going to be a problem for your students too. So
thank you all. Another audience question here is about how institutions can hold faculty accountable for keeping all of this in mind in their teaching, right? To treat students as people during this time. And also a question about evaluating faculty and their teaching during all of this. I know that's a huge topic, but if you could share some quick thoughts on that, we're getting near the end here.
I'll start, and I'll give a short answer here. So our faculty for the fall semester, even though we're all remote, we will continue doing the faculty evaluation like we've always done in the past. What we've done is to really up the support for faculty. You know, we do almost daily, if not weekly, sort of office hour support for faculty, for anybody who needs the help. And then on top of that, what we're also doing is we've asked faculty to do sort of certification courses, so that we are ensuring that every faculty has a minimum standard of understanding of our LMS. And that's where I think we're hoping to sort of up the game for the whole campus.
Thanks.
Can I add one thing? This is not a direct answer, but maybe an indirect answer. I really believe that we have such an opportunity in front of us to inspire faculty to see new ways of teaching and learning. And so I would really encourage institutions to make spaces for faculty to connect with each other, to share examples from their courses, maybe incentivize the sharing of examples through a blog or video series or some sort. I mean, that is where I turn right now. When I hear the word require, it gets smaller in my head, and I start to think about the opportunities of inspiring instead of requiring.
Thanks.
Yeah, and I just add that we have so many faculty who are not just responding with compassion in the situation, but are real exemplars in the way that they're carrying their course out with their students. And this is where I see the exciting part of sort of the faculty development side, is seeing people who are willing to help their peers in the situation, to show their examples, to show what their learning management site looks like, what their assessments look like, how they're managing to do non-proctored exams, things like this where we really should be learning from one another, and people are being free with that information and offering it up for people. So that's really exciting. And I just would add that I think Mike made the point earlier about, and Michelle too, just the notion that we're not, even as faculty, we're not all in the same places in terms of what our bandwidth is for managing this crisis. And there's multiple crises going on right now. So if you have it in your bandwidth to care for someone in your department, in your area, to just say to them, I know you've got a lot on your plate right now. Is there something I can do for you? That might be the difference between just barely treading water and being able to breathe a little bit. So looking out for one another is something I would encourage highly.
Thanks. We are running low on time, and I'm just going to ask one more question of each of you. Thanks again very much for joining us today, and thanks to all of our listeners out there. We really appreciate your questions and comments, and we'll try to handle some of those in an email after the event if possible too. Okay, so there's so much information out there about how to teach online. It can be overwhelming just to try to keep track of it. At the same time, there's this enormous hunger on the part of many instructors for just really practical things that they could learn about today and go try in, a class period later on this week. What would you hope someone listening could walk away with that they could actually use this fall, kind of however they're teaching? Viji, let's start with you.
Sure. I would just say one tool that I use often is Google Docs, for the simple reason that they can be updated very easily. So even assignments, I'll write them in Google Docs and share the links to students. And as questions come up, I can be more specific in my instructions to students. So it can be a living, breathing set of instructions to students. So that's an example of something that I can have flexibility and not really anticipating everything that might come up, but being able to help them troubleshoot when questions come up.
I'll go next. I mentioned that I'm a big advocate of using phones for just brief videos to share with students. And one tool that I find faculty really like is Adobe Spark. It's a free video creation tool, and it doesn't require you to show your face. It's great if you do, but it doesn't require you to, because you can actually have a voice narration over graphical elements or photographs that you either pull in from their library or you upload on your own. So creating, little brief snippets, maybe a welcome video, or even use it to introduce a new module or untangle a sticky concept in just a few minutes. It's a tool that has gone a long way in my own teaching.
I will not offer a technology tip. Rather, I'll offer 3 of the most powerful statements that you can say to another individual, whether you're a teacher saying to your student, or you're, in my case, a faculty developer, saying to a faculty. The first statement is that you can do it. It's such an important kind of affirmation that whatever crises you're in, you can survive this, you can do it. Second statement I would say to them is that I believe in you. This is that idea that you're there, you're support, you believe in their ability, and that that you believe in them. And then the third statement is that you are not alone. That whole idea of community, that there's support, there are people in the same situation as you that are willing to come alongside. And so you can do it, I believe in you, and you are not alone.
All right. Thank you all so much again. Thanks to TechSmith for underwriting today's presentation. We really appreciate their support. Thank you to all of our panelists for coming and sharing your insights today. And as a reminder, this session was recorded. We'll be sending around an email with a link to the on-demand version in a few days. For the Chronicle, I'm Becky Supiano.